amp rack for a Ford F-150, especially today we're talking about specifically B&O trucks. You probably got your package already and you unboxed everything, and this is what you got. This is our amp rack, right? This is how it gets shipped to you. This is actually a two-way active system with so it's an active two-way front stage, rear fill, subwoofer, Zen module, which is specific to the B&O vehicles, and we're going to talk about how to install that today and what you need and what basically to do to get started. This is basically be the first time touching the truck. This is basically the first thing we're going to put in the vehicle before we get started. So we're going to show you guys how to take apart the original factory B&O amplifier, subwoofer enclosure, all that stuff, kind of go over all the tools that we have here and how to basically prep this for installation. So awesome. As you can see, this is all together one piece. There's 3 mounting points on the amplifier rack, the top mounting point, and then 2 lowers that mount into the floor area. This actually mounts into the latch area, which we're going to show you. On this side of the board, you're going to have some tie wrapped up bass knob, which you're going to run to the front of the vehicle. This is going to plug into the B&O factory harness. We have our tweeter wires. In this case, it's a two-way system, so you have 2 extra wires here, left tweeter, right tweeter, and they are labeled on the connector. This one says left tweeter and right tweeter. And then you'll have a USB cable that's plugged into the Zen module, your subwoofer lead out with a Molex connector on it, so you can go ahead and take care of that, and your power and ground connections. So basically the first part of prepping this is, what I like to do is basically we're going to cut these tie wraps. First, the USB, which I would recommend leaving that plugged in to the Zen module because it's kind of difficult to see the orientation of it and plug it into the Zen. I like to cut all of this away, which is your bass knob, your B&O plug, thanks Nathan, and then your sub lead. So we'll go ahead and cut these tie wraps. Just follow that, don't cut any of the other tie wraps. A lot of the other tie wraps are holding all the cabling down. So this is your sub lead. We just cut the tie wrap from your USB for programming the Zen, and then your bass knob and your amplifier connector and your tweeter wires. So that's basically how you start this part of the process, get that prepped. And then you have, is actually the hardware. When we ship you the amp rack, these right here will be mounted to the amp rack already, and then you'll have a supplied hardware bag with 2 spacers and 2 13mm bolts, and that's going to bolt into the floor of the truck with these spacers. Let me open this up, guys. These spacers mount underneath. Show you that. So spacer underneath and bolt through, bolts to the factory floor location, OEM mounts. So we'll put that aside, get that back open in a minute once we get it into the vehicle. Sounds good stereo. So yeah, that's what we got here. And then Nathan, we have a bunch of tools here on the table.
Yeah.
What are all these tools for?
So we of course have our cutters for all the zip ties. We have a T25 torque screwdriver that will be needed to take the factory amp out of off the back wall. We have a ratchet just in case you don't have a drill. You can always use a ratchet to get all the factory hardware out. We have a panel tool. We prefer to use this tool, but most any panel tool will work. We also have a drill, an impact, a lot quicker and easier to get all the bolts out. And we have a pair of pliers to get the retainer clip off of the factory bolt for the latch for the seat. Then we have a 13mm socket, a 12mm, and a 10mm socket.
So that's basically all the tools we'll need to get this mounted into the truck and get the panels off that we need to get off. So, all right, well let's, oh, forgot. You also have your tweeter wires that come with the amp rack. That's what we got here on the table. Ready to get this started?
Ready.
Awesome. So, hey guys, hey Nathan.
Hey,
what's
Sage.
going on? All right, so we're in the truck, and the first thing we got to do is flip the back seat down. All right, so that, Nathan, if you want to flip that side down.
The side's pretty
Trucks
easy.
have a lever that you can pull and it falls down because the factory jack is actually located behind the 40 side of the chair back there. And then this side, it's latched back here and there's no pull lever or anything, and you know, seat goes up and down. So basically what you got to do is when you lift the bottom of the seat up, the actual back of the seat comes away from the back cab wall ever so slightly. And you can reach your hand back in here and bam, like that. Okay, so made that look really easy. Sometimes it's a little more difficult than that. But you can see right here, there's a little tiny nub sticking out right there, and you're gonna use your finger, or sometimes you can use like a looped piece of rope or like a hook tool or something like that to get this released, to get this down. So once you got this down, now you can see the latch. This is the factory latch piece that's mounted to the back wall. And actually, once we get this all removed and we mount our amplifier rack, this is your main reference point when putting the amplifier rack in, because the top right of the amp rack will actually bolt using this bolt right here. Our metal bracket fits in between this and bolts right in here. So the first thing I like to do is get this removed, and I'm going to show you why. This is probably the most difficult part of doing the whole amp rack install as far as I'm concerned. So we're going to go ahead, Nathan's going to go ahead and grab me a 10mm. We're going to cheat a little bit with a drill. If you have a drill impact gun, it makes life a lot easier. So you're going to back this out, and you can see you kind of push the latch out, and you can see up in here it's hooked. It's kind of like keyed and hooked, so it hooks in and then it goes back in place. Let's get that out of there. Okay, this is why I was saying it's a little bit difficult. So from factory, there's a little retainer washer that's bit down onto this bolt behind the basically keeping this bolt in place so it won't just fall off. So what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna actually have to remove this retainer clip from the bolt, so we can remove this 10mm bolt out of this mechanism. So Nathan, you want to grab me a pair of pliers? Sometimes this is actually all the way down and there's no spacing at all. It's very difficult to get underneath it. You can use a pry tool, or sometimes you can actually put this on the ground and tap it with a hammer to knock this down a little bit to get to this retainer. But I like to just use a pair of pliers, and if you squeeze it a couple times back and forth, you can actually, hopefully I don't sabotage myself here, you can actually just kind of crush it a little bit and it'll break. You guys can see that? So now we got that retainer clip off, and now the bolt comes right out. So that's number 2. So flip the seat down, remove this 10mm. You can use a ratchet or a drill, and then remove the retainer clip and discard it. And just throw it in our invisible trash can over there. All right, cool. So now we got this out. Let's put it somewhere safe. And then we're going to, Nathan, what else do we need here? We're going to start getting basically this whole, grab that. We got a 13 millimeter. So we're gonna have to get back here so we can see. So, all right, so the first 13 millimeter is right here. I'm gonna go ahead and remove that 13 millimeter. Set that aside. And then we're going to, there's another 13 millimeter right here on the floor. Set that aside. You're actually not going to need to use any of this hardware while putting it back in, except for the 10 millimeter that you took out. All the other hardware we're not using. We supply all the hardware for it. So we got that out, and then we have another, this is a 13 over here, another 13 there. Go ahead and discard that. And then you can actually, so got this, there's a 13 here on the floor, there's a 13 right here, and one more 13 over there. And basically now you can there's a little clip down here, you push it in and you can just pull that connector out. And then if you use a pry tool or your hands, you can literally just pull this wire connector. Sometimes you'll have to use a pair of pliers or a pry tool or something to get that out of the enclosure, but you can literally just unplug that and unclip it from the enclosure, and at this point the sub enclosure will lift right up out of the way. So now you can go ahead and set that to the side. I'll hand that to Nathan. He'll put that in a good spot. And then Nathan, let's get a 10 millimeter. Okay, so this is the trick. So what I highly recommend is a deep well 10 millimeter. If you don't have a deep well 10 millimeter, you'll have to get like an open end wrench or something, because you can see over here, Dawn, if you look down in here, guys, and Dawn, it's a 10 millimeter, it's like a stud, so it's very long sticking out. So if you don't have a deep well socket that'll fit down, you know, all the way over and grab onto that 10 millimeter, you'll have to use like an open end wrench or something. So in our case, I'll show you guys what this looks like. That's what it looks like. So it's basically a stud that screws into the floor for the enclosure to mount to. So we'll take that out. We're going to discard that to the side. We're not going to use it again. And then there's one more 10 millimeter next to it. You guys can see that one. One's easy to get to. Go ahead and pull that out. Set that to the side. And now comes our T25 Torx.
You've also got this 10 over here as well.
Yeah, we'll get to that one in a minute. So we're going to take these T25s out. Remember, guys, we're not going to use these, but we'll put them in a baggie or something and save them if you ever want to put the truck back to factory, because we're not going to drill any holes or anything. This is all going to mount into factory holes. So now the amplifier is completely loose, the bracket is loose, and now we have to unplug our connections to the factory amplifier. And they all have tabs, basically release tabs. So you'll basically just push down with your finger on the release tab and pull the plug out. Same with this one, push it down, pull it out. This one looks a little bit different, but it also has a push tab on it. You can see it's ever so slight, but it does release and pulls out. So now that's the factory amp assembly. It's completely unplugged, and we can set that aside. Okay. All right, so now we have removed the factory amplifier subwoofer enclosure I forgot to tell you about. Over here we took a 13 millimeter bolt off of the to get the subwoofer enclosure out, and there's also still a stud mounted over here. So you'll take your deep well and remove that stud and set it to the side. So now you guys can see we have two T25 Torx, which are at the top of the amplifier. I have a 10mm, two 10mm studs, and two 13mm nuts that we took off, and we can set those to the side. And remember our 10mm at the top, which we're going to keep because we're going to use that again. So now we got that out, and now the next step is to remove the C pillar, which is front pillar is A, this is B, and this is C. That's what we call it, the C pillar. We're going to want to go ahead and remove this. It just makes the installation easier to plug in all the cabling, and you're actually going to have this removed to run your wiring to the front. So let's talk about the inflatable seat belt in this particular truck. Let's talk about how to get this apart. Nathan, can you pass me we need a 12mm and a pry tool so we can go ahead and get this detached in here. So take our pry tool, and you basically get up underneath there, and you can very carefully just get this cover popped off. Just put that in a safe spot, and then you can see it's a 12mm, which we'll use a ratchet. Basically just unbolt this 12mm. Bam. Okay. And that'll retract back in place, and then you have this in your hand. I like to put the bolt back in there and tighten it a little bit so it doesn't fall out when you're working on the vehicles, and you won't lose it because it'll be stuck in there. Okay, so now we got that detached. Got the panel here. So the first thing you're going to do, actually, if you could see down here, guys, you're going to pull this sill plate off, and you can basically you can use a pry tool if you want. You can get a pry tool up underneath there and lift the panel up a little bit, and it comes off pretty simply. You just pry it up and it pops right off. Super simple. It's like Legos, taking apart Legos. So then what I like to do is I like to pull up on this weather strip seal, kind of move that out of my way. And right down here at the bottom of this panel, it's actually also clipped in. So we'll go ahead and release that. There's a clip right here. So now that's loose. And then we come back over here, and you can literally stick your fingers in there, or you can use a pry tool if you want, and you can just basically pull on it. Be a little aggressive, it's okay. It's designed to unclip like that. Okay, so now you see this is released. When I pulled on it, all the rest of the clips kind of came out. It has this plastic retainer piece that kind of holds this in place if the airbags in the vehicle ever deploy. This thing is designed to hold this in place, but what you can do is if you push it up, you can kind of see how it works. You guys see that? It's basically won't pull through there, but if you grab it at the top, the first like T, I guess, if you turn it, it'll actually slide through because there's a little slot, and then you can grab it again and turn it again, and it'll come right through the hole. So, and that's how you take that off. It's pretty simple. You see down in here, these top clips came out when I popped this off. There's one last clip down here at the bottom, which you guys can see down in here. It's real tight, but you can finagle this up. Just watch when you're lifting it up that you protect the vehicle. There we go. So now the panel is completely out, and now you can pull the seat belt through the opening and your panel is out completely. So there's a top clip, 1, 2, 3, 4 clips. This one has an alignment pin to align it up down here. It makes it a little more difficult to get out because I think Ford put this in before they put the seats in, but we're not going to take the seats out to do this install. You just have to finagle that clip around and get it out of there. It's not that difficult. So go ahead and set this in a safe spot so your dog doesn't take off running with it, or it gets ran over by the truck, or you know. So just put it in a safe spot. And then I like to get this seal just kind of put back in place, because this edge right here is really sharp. You will cut yourself, so be very careful. So put that seal back in place. Now your door will close. If this seal's not put back in place, the door won't close. So if you don't finish the project today, then you can close the truck up. So now we got all this stuff. I'll go ahead and put this up here out of our way. And now you can see we have more space, and we have a bunch of cables, right? So we'll get that pulled out of our way. So all this is free. We have all of our areas here, and we're going to go grab the amp rack now and go ahead and bring it into the vehicle carefully, and we're going to talk about this first bolt right here and how that's going to basically line everything up for you guys to mount into the vehicle. And you can also move this out of your way. You can actually pull this out as far as you possibly can, and then you can get it locked like that. It's real world stuff. Okay, let's just get this out of your way. Okay, cool. So now basically everything's apart, all the hardware's out, and now we can set the amplifier rack into the truck. We got the amp rack, and what you can do is, I like to have a buddy here with me to do this. It's easier to do it with 2 people. What I like to do when I pick it up off the table is to go ahead and hold this stuff up out of the way. You can just basically leave it here on top of the chair. Your sub wire, kind of get that out of your way, and then we can go ahead and set it down. So it's basically just gonna sit down in there
without touching the buttons.
Guys, please be careful. There's some buttons on the top of this particular amplifier and some of the other packages. Try not to press these buttons. If you do, just make sure they're all in this particular thing. They're actually going to all be in. They're all going to be pushed in all of our packages with this amplifier. So if there's one sticking out, make sure to push it back in, or if you have an issue, just give us a call. So now the amplifier is just basically sitting in this area. It's not mounted yet. But the first thing we're going to do is put the latch back in place. And how this works is, remember, it kind of slides in, so you'll get it lined up, and you can get it lined up into that position. And at this point, we're going to need our spacers, which are, I'll be right back. But yeah, when you get the amplifier rack, make sure you have these in the truck with you already. Or have your buddy go get them. Okay, so these wires, like I said, the base knob and everything, the base knob's actually going to run down the driver's side here, so we'll just drape that over, get our USB cable out of the way, All right, so spacers that come with the kit. You got 2 bolts, 2 spacers. So that's for Nathan's side, on the passenger side of the vehicle. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna basically just grab the edge of the board and lift up and go ahead and slide one of your spacers underneath the amp rack. And then you notice how we got this in place, no bolt in it yet. Got my spacer slid underneath, and I'm gonna go ahead and just put my bolt in there, and I'm gonna just tighten it gently with my fingers. Doesn't have to be tight at all, just make sure it threads in by hand into the opening or into the factory location. Get yours in yet, Nathan?
Gotta find it first.
Okay. Just be patient. Get it all lined up. Don't tighten anything down yet until you get all those hand tightened in. And then once you have the spacers under there and those just threaded a little way in, you don't need to tighten them all the way down, then you can push back on this amp board right here, and you can get this lined up. You guys gotta push back on it, and you can get this started with your fingers as well. And get it tightened in there a little bit. Okay, so now the whole amp rack is in place. We got all 3 of our bolts started. Basically, once you get this bracket in between this, and it's basically in the vicinity, your mounting points on the floor will automatically line up, because they're, you know, mounted in particular spots to actually go back into factory holes. So now once you get all these things started with your fingers, and then you can go ahead and, what I go ahead and do is I tighten this top one, tighten it pretty tight, so this is securely on there. And then you can take your 13mm, if you want to keep in the truck. You can basically just tighten that down, and then tighten that down, and now the amplifier rack is mounted in the vehicle. So you can see it's securely mounted. It's not going to move anywhere. It has a little flex to it, but it's very secure. And that's it, it's mounted. So now let's connect the Zen. So USB cable, like I said, you want to leave that accessible. And bass knob, you got this guy right here, which kind of comes from the same amplifier connections and loops up to the seat area. So you take your bass knob, and I like to run my wires underneath that, down in place. So that's going to go in there, that laid in. So the first connection, gray plug, right? Remember, on the factory amplifier you have a gray plug, a black plug, and a blue USB. So the 2 connections we're going to use is, we're not using the black plug anymore. We're going to be using the gray plug and the blue plug. So the first one is plugging the blue USB right into the Zen module. So that'll basically plug right in. Should just go right in. So, and the top of the connector, the top of where the latch is going to face out, and it's just going to line right up and clip right in. Right? So super simple. And then next, we're going to take our gray plug and plug that right in, right there, right? and we can kind of get these cables in place. We have also another cable that we're not going to be using, which is the green connector, which is the factory subwoofer connection. I like to move this back in here, get it all secure. And what I like to do with this one normally is I'll just get this and I'll go ahead and tie wrap it back in here, out of our way. So now you have all your connections for connecting the Zen. So got that Zen connected. We got our sub knob ready to run to the front of the vehicle. Just set it down here in the channel that we already took apart. Your USB for the Zen setup, we ship it plugged into the Zen module. Once you're done setting up your chimes and everything, which will be the last thing you do after getting the whole system installed, once you power it up and everything, you'll actually go ahead and set the chime levels and backup beeper levels to your particular liking and truck. So once you're done with that, you can just disconnect it from the Zen because it's a one-time setup. But leave this accessible, leave it plugged in. You can kind of just set it to the side for now. You can see here that it comes with the sub lead. We ship it with a Molex connector, so it can be ran underneath and connected to the sub box, and you could remove the sub box and nothing will short out. That's why we choose to do that type of connection. So what I normally do is I'll just put it down here on the floor area, right? And then at this point, you can flip the seat up, flip this part up. This particular truck, customer's truck, he has a bunch of stuff in here, which is normal. From the subwoofer, I like to run it right here in between these seats. Make it harder than it is, but literally you can just run your sub lead right out here and leave it there for when you're ready to put the sub box in, and then flip that back down. So yep, so now you'll move on to doing the rest of the wiring, and that's how you do the Zen connections in a B&O truck.
So these are going to the front of the vehicle. Before we get these ran, we're going to have to pull this B-pillar off. And the seat is actually in the way, so what I'm going to do is connect the battery back just for a minute. We don't have anything disconnected or anything, so shouldn't be harmful to connect the battery back. You want to take this panel out. And there is this right here. So you kind of have to pry on a little bit. Just like a seatbelt cover. And then this piece right here. So I can usually get my hand under. There we go. It just hooks in at the top, and there's two clips at the bottom. So then you can take this right here and just pull it on out, and there's clips on the bottom as well. Grab this one. And if you can see right in here, there's one more clip right there. It's kind of difficult to get out, but if you just press right there where it is, it just comes right on out, and then you can line that seat belt out of there, pull it on out. Okay. Now we can channel these wires on up to the front. And you really just want to get these wires underneath this right here. Just push down between the carpet and that piece right there. And then you can just put zip ties, tying it to the factory wiring here. We're going to continue running that on up. In this piece right here, you have to pull this weather stripping out. First thing you're going to do is pull the clip from the bottom, and then it's just going to pull this way. And you have to go around the hood latch. So we can just run this on up. Gonna lay that in the floor for right now. It's wet right there.
Yep.
We're gonna get some zip ties in here. Don't forget to flush cut the zip ties. And this is where, if you have the three-way active system, you're going to have to run wires up to this pillar here. So basically, you would just get your panel tool, pry on this piece right here. And pretty much right now, we're going to pull this down. That can just pull straight down. Very simple. And right now we're going to go ahead and run all of these wires on up. Make sure when you're running this wire, the base knob wire, just be careful with this clip here. You can sometimes just take a piece of tape and cover it, just so that way you know that you're not going to damage it. Sometimes when you're pulling this way, it can actually just break it off. So just keep that in mind. So I'm going to put that up for right now. And then down here, I'm going to zip tie my wires to this cable right here. Okay. Then you can just push those to the side. So the base knob is actually going to go right here in the dash. I will show you how to get that removed and how to drill the hole. And also, if you did have the 3-way active system, this is where you would start diverging the wire for the mid-range. Basically, you would just go straight up here if this customer has a an alarm system in here. So basically, you would just go straight up here and come out right here. And you can zip tie to the factory wiring in there. Okay, so in this section of the video, we're going to install the bass knob in the dash. What you'll need is a drill, a unibit. We'll need a hole saw to make a hole behind the dash so the bass knob can actually sit in the dash. A 10mm socket, a 7mm socket, and the panel tool. So let's get started. First thing you're going to need is 7mm and panel tool. You're going to drop this panel down and just let it dangle. There's going to be a 7 on either side, or these bronze colored 7s. Set those aside. And then you can just pull on this piece right here. You can probably tell. I'm going to go ahead and drop the steering column. There's this little leather piece that's attached to the steering column. You can just pull up on that and it should come off of the steering column. So now we're going to take this back over here. And this is where the bass knob is going to go, right in this area. So we just want to make sure you can kind of eyeball it to where the center is going to be. It should be about right there. You can take your unibit, get it in the center. Let's see if that's big enough. That should be good. Basically, you just want to make a hole that's slightly larger than the threads on this right here. And usually you can, so there's still some plastic there. You can just take your unibit, kind of do that, and I'll clean that off. And you just want to poke that through. Well, actually you want to keep one of these washers on one side, so that way it keeps it in place. Take the other one on top of there. That is a 10mm, so you can take your 10mm socket, which you have to use the right side. And then just turn it all the way to the left or the right. Just make sure that the arrow is in the right direction. Make sure that it's even, and push it all the way on. Yes. Okay. Now, the next thing we need to do is go ahead and get our hole saw. Same one that we're going to be using for the power kit. and tighten that on. Take it over here. And as you can probably see, you have this that the bass knob would not be able to, the panel wouldn't be able to go on because of the bass knob. We added some distance there, so we're gonna have to cut a hole right there so that way the bass knob can fit. Alright, so we're gonna move the steering out of the way. And we're just gonna center this hole saw right up on that panel. Clean it up a little bit. And you also want to go ahead and get your bass knob wire over here and up through the hole just a little bit. We're going to be zip tying this down, and once we get the cluster panel back on. And the two bronze screws go on either side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed this slack back through here and put a zip tie right here on these factory wires. Alright, so in this section we're going to disassemble the A-pillars, so that way for the two-way kits you can install the tweeters into your factory pillars, and if you have the three-way kit, that's where you will take the pillars that we have made, and that's where you'll put them into the dash. So what you'll need is Phillips. You'll need that later. Basically right now you'll need a 10mm and the panel tool that's provided in the kit. So alright, so you can see there's a panel here and a panel here. These you can usually get them with your fingers, but there's actually clips on both sides of this panel, although this one does not remove. You can just kind of turn it around so that way you can get to that bolt, but you don't need to remove it. Now be careful with these do like to break sometimes. So, not the panel itself, but actually the clip from the panel. So, just be careful when you're trying to spin them around. Then you take a 10mm. There are one on either side. And just gonna pull down and up out of the dash. Here you can see that there's a clip on the factory tweeter, and that's it. And you can repeat the same thing on the other side. The driver's side is identical. So I definitely recommend using a screwdriver instead of a drill, getting these Phillips screws out. The reason for that being is that the plastic does like to strip out, so with a screwdriver you don't really have to worry about that. So 2 screws, one on either side. You can just go ahead and remove that. And this tweeter will sit right in place. Don't over tighten them because these screws are the exact length they need to be. If you go any tighter than they need to be, they will actually poke through the plastic here. So just be mindful of that. So now this pillar has the tweeter installed and is ready to go back in the vehicle. So here you can see that we have the factory style plug, and plugs right in. Slides in at the bottom there, and there are some tabs up here you have to line up, and it clips right in. Take your two 10mm bolts, one at the top, one at the bottom, flip your panels around, and that's it. Alright, so we're about to get started on the power wire kit. This is power and ground. These trucks do not have a sufficient ground on the chassis of the truck, so we like to run power and ground just so that way the amplifiers get the amount of power that they actually need. Tools that you'll need are an impact of some sort with an 11 and a 12, and also a 10. There's different nuts on different batteries for these Ford trucks. I like to change it up every year to year. You need a 1 1/8 hole saw, so that way we can go through the floor of the truck where we're actually going to be running the wires into the truck. Some kind of aught gauge cutters that you can cut the wire with. You can also use some cutters like this. We prefer to use a cutter like this though. You'll need a panel tool, a 7mm.
For what?
I don't know. Why is this over here?
I didn't know. I just put everything there.
Man, you're tripping me up.
You're the tool department.
You're tripping me up, man. That will be handy. And the flush cutters for the zip ties. And in the kit comes with these right here, which will actually be the grommet, you could say, and that will fasten on to the chassis of the truck, and we will put our wire through there, and this will actually tighten it down. So that'll be nice, and it's water sealed. You don't have to worry about it leaking or anything like that. You will need some Allen keys to be able to hook the power wire up to the amplifier rack, and that should be it. First step is connecting the battery back. We do recommend, if you have automatic side steps, that you, whenever you disconnect the battery, that they're up whenever you're working on the vehicle. It'll just make things a lot easier when you're actually under the vehicle. So what we're going to do is go ahead and connect the battery and disconnect it. That simple. Next step is we need to get this side panel off, this C-pillar, and this side panel here. So same as we did on the other side. pull this panel up and pull this weather stripping. You can go ahead and unclip this here. Here we have the seat belt again. Need to pull on this, which I'll need the panel tool, and a 12mm socket. That'll just pull off. Make sure to go ahead and put that back in so you don't lose it. Next step is pulling this down. Well, actually, we need to get this seat out of our way. So, thankfully this side just has a tab right there. So, now we can pull this on out of our way. And this side is just like the other side. Go ahead and pull your seatbelt through. Pull this out of the way. You can go ahead and put this weather stripping back on so that way you don't cut yourself. Okay, so now we're ready to go ahead and run the power wire through. The power wire is actually going to come up through the floor right here. Just the simplest thing we see you to do. It's very hard to fit 2 0-gauge power wires through these channels here, so we find it easiest to just run it underneath the truck. So first step is going to be cutting the zip ties on the kit. And so you have your ground and your power. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the power. So this is going to line up just like this in the vehicle. We're actually going to screw the fuse holder down right here and route the wire up here and connect it onto this terminal here. That is an 11mm socket, and over here that should be a 12mm socket. Also in this bag we have 2 plastic screws. Well, they're not plastic, but they're for plastic. So these are what's going to mount the fuse holder onto the truck. So you can see there's a tab here and a tab here. I'm just going to push that down. And using a bit that is magnetized definitely helps. And do not go ahead and connect this because we don't really want to be running this power wire when it's live. So we can go ahead and connect the ground here, but then again, just don't connect it here. Like, don't connect the ground terminal back to the battery. Okay, so this is actually a 13 millimeter. So I'm gonna get that disconnected. And take your ground wire and connect it there. And he has an aftermarket ground, the customer does, on here. I'm actually going to put that on the top side. If it'll come off. There we go. Going to put that on the top side here. Now I'm going to take my ground. I'm actually going to route it just straight down. That should just go straight down to the ground. And you can take your power wire and go the same direction. Sometimes you can get under the truck and get it straightened out. So there we go. So all of this will go together. What I'm going to do is just put a zip tie right there, so that way everything is nice and neat up here. So that way when we're ready to connect the power, everything is nice and uniform. So now it's time to get under the truck and start running the wires back. Okay, so we've got our wires down under the truck, and we have this where the chassis actually meets up here, and we're just gonna run it on the other side of this right here. So we're gonna go ahead and pull that all the way through and over this way.
I don't know what angles I'm getting. Alright, once you get that situated, we're gonna switch sides.
Yeah. Okay.
Alright, so they come down like that, and then here it's split though. We gotta fix that. Alright, so the wires come down, and it's hard to get a shot, but it goes on top of this frame mounting point, and then it continues this way. And one thing to always check for, whoever installed these, what do you call these? Step bars, they push out this customer's grommet right there. So obviously it's leaking water. So that's something that he'll need to get addressed, but just something to look out for while you're under here. So what Nathan's zip tying to is actually factory wiring, right?
No, this is aftermarket.
All right, so what if they don't have aftermarket wiring?
Then there is some factory here.
Where's the factory mounting points? So there's some factory wiring already under here. And you can zip tie along the way to this factory wiring. Of course, the reason we put the step bar up was just to ensure that this motorization piece didn't interfere with any of the wiring or anything like that. Also, it happens to give you a little bit more room while you're under here running the wires. So we'll just go down the path and zip tie it securely to factory wiring or factory mounting points. If you do decide to zip tie to aftermarket wiring, just double check, make sure they did a good job. Of course, factory is going to do a great job, but you know, just pay attention as you go down and zip tying this.
Then here you can do the same thing at the front.
Yep, and here you'll see another factory mounting point for the body to the chassis, and you'll want to go up and over that point. And again, this wire is it's in a sleeving that we put on the wire, so it's protected from the elements and gives you additional protection, so no worries there. So we continue on. You can see the point there above that mounting point.
And from here, this is where we will be going through in the floor. So that will be the next step, is actually drilling the holes from the top side and getting those grommets in place. Okay, so next you'll need your drill and the 1 1/8 hole saw and the 2 grommets. So take these on over. And you want to make sure that you don't drill too high, because if so, then the carpet's not going to go down and the panel won't go on. So you kind of want to go right at this angle where you can kind of see the curvature of the truck. So you want to go right there and kind of go as far right as you possibly can, where you can still have that grommet in place. So that's that. You want to make sure that you put this side in down there instead of this side, because if you try and run the Tech Flex in here, it's just going to get caught in it, and that's not very fun. So you can push that in right there, and then on the other side you can thread that on. You want to make sure that it's pretty tight, just so that way it gets a good seal. Then the next one you don't want to do right next to it, and you want to do maybe about a 1/2 inch over. before we get that in there, I'm gonna go ahead and get like a
Grab vacuum, clean it up.
So yeah, basically the body of the truck will be right here in between this and this nut right here. If I can, there we go. And then this nut right here is actually going to clamp the wire in this grommet. So with this rubber piece around the wire and this nut on here, it actually squeezes these little clamps together. And then you'll hear it click until you can't go anymore, and it will be watertight sealed. So we're gonna go ahead, put that one in, tighten it down. Then you can take these out. Go ahead and take the rubber piece out as well, because you can just slide those over the wire, make it a lot easier. So now, sorry.
There's a door there.
Oh my goodness.
You alright?
Ouch. Okay. So this rubber piece will just slide on. And so will that. Push these down. Pull the wire tight. Make sure that rubber piece sits in between the wire and those clamps, like that. Then you can go ahead and spin the nut on there. And that should be good. Do the same thing for the ground. Pull it tight. So now I can't even pull the wire or push it in any direction. So that's how you know it's got a good seal. At this point, you want to run the wire that would be fine for that. You want to go ahead and remove the jack, just so it makes it easier to run the wires. Okay, so we can pull the jack out of the way. And you can just set the wires up for right now. And power up as well. If you can come over here, I'm actually going to fold the wires into the panel as much as possible, and I'm going to zip tie them to this factory wiring right here. I think my zip ties are right here. Get a few of those. Do the same thing up here. Make sure to cut the zip ties. And then you can just route the wires behind this panel here. Push the panel back. Now we're ready to go ahead and put the C pillar and this whole side back together. First thing you want to do is get the seat belt through the hole. And then you need to get these clips lined up, which are not the most fun thing in the world. But you can see that there's a tab and a clip. Just need to get that down far enough. There we go. That clips in. Before you get it all clipped back together, you need to make sure that you get this tab put back in, that safety clip. Push it back on. And that goes in there just like that. And the weather stripping just slides right back on.
Floor piece.
And the side panel. Okay. So now we have our power wire right there where the distribution blocks are. So we can go ahead and cut those to length and connect those. Alright, so I'm going to do my ground first, which is just the black sleeve. And I'm just going to leave enough slack to where it's like that. Actually, I'm going to run it behind, see how much I need, to where it's like that. So that's where I need to cut. And you don't want to strip too much back. Maybe just 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch. And you need to go ahead and take this screw all the way out. Make sure you do not lose it. Set it to the side, because you've got to get this little piece out of here. Alright, thread that back in there just a tad bit. Okay, so we've got the ground stripped back, and we just have this sleeve right here. We're going to use the heat shrink that's included in the kit and just slip it over here around the sleeve. It's a lot easier if you actually put this on there before you cut the power wire or the ground wire, but you just run it up like that, and you can take a lighter, torch, heat gun, anything that you have, and just heat it up. Go all the way around until it's tight on the wire. Make sure your wire is twisted nice and tight. Take your Allen key, tighten it all the way down. Then we can put this cover back on. Now keep in mind that the power wire needs to go to the distribution block that says power. If for whatever reason these caps ever get swapped, the one that has the fuses in line is the one that's for the power. If that is hooked up backwards, it will fry the entire system, so you have to keep that in mind. I'm gonna go ahead and put my heat shrink on there, make it easier, and get my length. Let's be about right there. And strip back about 3/4 of an inch. Then take your heat shrink up and heat it with a lighter, torch, heat gun, anything that you have. Now we can tuck these wires back behind the panel. And we can use a zip tie to make sure they're not going anywhere. Make sure to put the distribution block cover back on. And now that we're back here, we want to go ahead and run the sub wire. This is simply just coming straight down through here. And if we lift this seat up, you can see that it's right here. We just want to route it right through here, just like that. So now that's ready for the box to be plugged in. One thing before we get it all back together is the jack. The jack will go back into place. And the thumb piece. And that's it. Alright, so we've got the power wire ran and it's connected to the amp rack. Just make sure whenever you've got all the wires ran, just go under the truck again and double check, make sure the wires are nice and tight. Zip tie anywhere that you see that it needs to be zip tied. Next thing we're going to do is go ahead and connect it at the battery. So we want to connect the power and the factory ground back to the battery terminal. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and connect the factory ground.
And before you do that, make sure no one's laying underneath if you have the motorized steps.
Yes.
And as soon as you connect ground, they might open if your door is open.
Correct. So we're going to go ahead and connect this. And that is a 10 millimeter. Okay, so now we've got the factory ground terminal connected. We're just going to tuck this power wire down into this channel. And we're going to be connecting here. Go ahead, take a blade, just cut a nice straight line down, 2 of them. And then just straight across. That will leave enough room for that. That's what that is. That will leave enough room for that power wire to sit down on there. And also, if you have any other accessories like this customer has, go ahead and put those on top of our power kit.
And it might spark, and that's okay. It'll wake you up.
You don't actually feel the spark, it just sparks. Now that sits on there. Nice.
You're good. So
So you can put a few more zip ties up here as you feel necessary. Put one here, another one here. That's what we're gonna do. So just as you feel, just go ahead and zip tie it on up. you can never have too many zip ties. So
Never.
so now we're gonna get started on the reassembly of the vehicle. I know on this side of the truck we have all the panels on. We just need to connect the seat belt back. So we have the bolt right here, and just going to connect it like this. And don't forget the tab piece. So that goes on there like that. That seat belt's done. Now we can go on to the other side. We have a little bit more to put back together over here. So we have the C pillar that needs to be put back on, this side panel, the B pillar, that side panel, the kick panel, and the panel that goes on the side of the dash right there. Okay, so we're going to start with the C pillar right here. Just want to get that set in there. Make sure to pull the weather stripping off all the way up and down. And remember, you have your wires right here. Just make sure those are behind the panel. You have the seat belt up here. Needs to be fished through. And got to there we go.
And the little clippy thing at the top.
Yeah. So once you get this pin down here lined up and that one clip in, then I would start going up here and putting that little airbag safety clip back in. And don't try and just slam the panel back in there. Make sure all the clips line up first, so that way you don't damage any clips. And then it has to be clipped in down here as well. And this weather stripping can go back on. So the next thing we're going to do is put this B pillar back in. Since those side panels actually sit on top of the pillars. So the pillar goes in between these two seat belts, and this cable has to go in that slot right there. And it's usually best to pull the weather stripping off. So then, just like you did with the C pillar, make sure everything lines up first before you try to push anything on. And then you have this right here. The top hooks in, and then the bottom clips on. And this just clips in. Then the weather stripping can go back on. Then you have your side panel right here. And before we get moving on up to the front, we're going to put this seat belt back on here. $12mm socket. And don't forget the cover for it. Now we can move on to the front. So we have these three panels right here that are going on the front. We can start with this one, very simple. You can pull the weather stripping or just kind of tuck it behind it. It's perfectly fine. This one, you will have to pull the weather stripping back a little bit. It's just going to slide back, and the clips go that way. And make sure to get that clip in there as well. Weather stripping can go back on. And the last piece is the side panel. There you go. For this back seat, to get it to latch back up, you just need to push it all the way back, pull the seat up, push it back down, and it aligns this bar and this bracket together, and then just push it on. And that's it.
Alright guys, so this is the end of the first installation video. So we got the amplifier rack, the power and ground ran. We also got the interface behind the actual factory stereo for you Sony guys. And now we're going to move on to the speakers and the sound treatment and the block out plates in the next video. So congratulations, you made it this far, and go ahead and click the next video and let's get started on the next section.